In this episode, I sit down with Stuart Tom, President of the Board of Directors for the International Code Council, to explore the evolving landscape of building and fire safety. We dive into Stuart's extensive career, from his beginning in engineering to his critical roles as Chief Building Official and Fire Marshal. Stuart shares insights on ICC's international impact and the integration of modern technologies into building codes to tackle challenges like electric vehicle integration and fire risks associated with emerging technologies. Join us as we discuss the future of building safety, the importance of collaboration, and the critical role of education and mentorship in shaping safer communities. Okay, Stuart Tom, welcome to ICC Region 1 Radio. How are you?
I'm fantastic, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Well, we were talking a little bit before we even got started, and even before we get into the questions, if you are watching this on YouTube, you are not missing out. But if you're listening to it, you're definitely missing out, because we are both wearing our CalBO, our California Building Association friends and partners have provided us all with these fabulous bowling shirts, powdered blue. I really do like the powdered blue for the upcoming ABM in Long Beach. So.
And Tim, thanks for pointing that out. This was not coordinated. When you started this interview, I noticed you're wearing the same shirt I am. Purely coincidental. But it turns out that I chose this shirt to wear today because the annual business meeting for ICC is in Long Beach this year. So what better way to remind people that we're coming to California?
Exactly. It's sometimes it's awkward if we're both wearing the same thing, but I don't think that this is awkward. This is actually kind of a welcome surprise, right? So, all right. Well, Stuart, welcome. I know your travel schedule has been kind of hectic being the president of the board of directors for the International Code Council, but I'm really thankful that you were able to join us, especially in May, with it being Building Safety Month. And there's a lot of things going on, but I'm excited to have you. So
yeah, Tim, for our listening or viewing audience, Tim and I have been trying to get together for quite some time to do this.
We have.
But Tim, as you know, my schedule is kind of crazy, and we were just together at the code hearings in Orlando. And when we stumbled across each other, you said, "Stuart, we need to find some time." Yep. And it just so happens that I've got 2 days that I'm actually available for this. I just got back from South Carolina.
Okay.
The South Carolina Building Officials Association just had their annual business meeting. Fantastic turnout. And all of them there, of course, are doing what everybody else that's listening to this is interested in. And that's, of course, learning more about what they can do to protect their communities. Mm-hmm. And I'll be back for 2 days, and then I turn right back around, go back to the East Coast. I'll be in Washington, D.C. So I'm happy to be here with you, Tim.
Well, I missed you at Washington. I was just attending the Congressional Fire Service Institute. I did run into Mike McDaniel, one of the board of directors for the ICC. Unfortunately, I did not run into David Spencer. I know he was there as well. I'm unfortunate that our paths did not cross, but it sounds like you guys are definitely dividing and conquering and trying to make all the different things that are out there, and busy schedule, to say the least.
Yeah, people don't realize that while the board of directors is composed of 18 directors from around the entire country, there is so much that is going on all the time that we can't all be there. And so as president this year, I have asked different directors to cover different things. And the Congressional Fire Services event is something that traditionally I really enjoy attending. It's an impressive event, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. That was my first year attending, and I was blown away. To say the least, I was blown away. I mean, just the dinner itself was fabulous. But then the next day, because they had it structured, I guess, a little bit differently than previous years, the next day was the lobbying and going up to Capitol Hill and talking with your legislators. That, to me, was
probably the most rewarding experience I think I've probably had in my fire service career, being able to connect with, policymakers at the federal level.
Yeah, Tim, for those who have not and probably will never have the opportunity to attend that event, it is an event where you see more gold and shiny brass and bling that you have
Yep.
ever seen before, because the chiefs and chief officers from fire services across the country are
Hmm.
there to pay tribute to members who receive awards and so forth,
Yeah.
who really deserve the recognition. And it
Yep.
is an impressive event. So I'm glad you were able to be there.
Yeah, there was a lot of, hello, chief and hi, chief, and we were all shaking hands. And but you're right, there was definitely a lot of gold badges walking around the Capitol, and very, like I said, very rewarding. Very, it was one that I was able to connect with some people here, look from my area here in California, in DC, to have very impactful conversations. And like you said, not everybody's ever going to have that opportunity, but I highly recommend it if you ever do have the opportunity to attend that event.
Yeah, do not pass it up. If you
No.
get a seat at any of those tables, do not pass it up. But
Yeah.
anyway, Tim,
Yeah.
what's up?
Well, welcome. Well, Stuart, what I want to do is I want to start a little bit about your background, right? We always start this podcast talking about everybody's background, and you have, you're in the fire service, the building safety profession, and now the president of the board of directors for the International Code Council. Can you walk us through that? Provide us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, my background is a little bit unusual, but it's really served me well. I have a degree in engineering, and I'm a licensed engineer in several states. And that led me to the first part of my career, which was working for local building departments. And I had some wonderful opportunities early on, having worked for the city of Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
one of the um, one of the most complex departments, with many different departments that specialize in things that really enabled me to learn what is involved in building department administration
Mm-hmm.
and applying the codes to protect communities. I then transitioned over and became the chief building official to a neighboring city, a large city in Southern California, the city of Glendale.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually their chief building official for 16 years. And there I was able to put my building code knowledge, engineering background, and so forth to good use, helping my department, my staff protect that community. And what you referred to as a little bit slightly different background is I started working with the fire services locally in the Southern California area. But then very quickly, I started working at the state level with the state
Mm-hmm.
fire marshal's office.
Yep.
And that eventually grew to working with the fire services nationally. And the reason I found that very, very valuable is that what we traditionally do as building officials is actually pretty focused. And
Mm-hmm.
if you want to take a look at the broader picture, you have to look outside of your backyard and take a
Mm-hmm.
look at what others that are in that same general space are doing to be really effective. And so I started working with uh, folks in the state fire marshal's office for years. And a point came along where I was asked to, I call it jumping ship, moving from the building department to the fire department. And I moved over to the Fire Prevention Bureau as the fire marshal for
Okay.
the city of Glendale. And I actually completed my municipal service in Glendale as their fire marshal. And after that, I had gotten to know so many people throughout the entire state and truly throughout the country
Yeah.
in both the building and the fire service environment, that I decided to spend more of my time uh, at the national level with the International Code Council,
Mm-hmm.
and it really did open up doors. And at one point, I was encouraged to run for the board of directors, and I was fortunate to be elected.
Yeah. And many could say that the rest is history, but how long have you been on the board of directors? And then obviously this last year you were elected to the presidential role.
In total, so far, this is my 9th year on the board. So it's quite a bit of time for me. Not everybody
Mm-hmm.
serves that much time. I actually have the longest tenure on the current board of
Okay.
directors. And by the time I matriculate off after my past president term next year, it will be a total of 10 years. Not everybody needs to serve 10 years to be really
Mm-hmm.
effective and contribute to the board. Some people serve a single 3-year term, and
Yeah.
that's perfect for them, and it's perfect for the organization and perfect for the board. In my particular case, I spent quite a few years as a director, and eventually the time came when I decided I think I can contribute a little bit more, and
Yep.
so I moved up to the executive board.
Yeah. And what's the difference been between just being kind of an area director and now part of the executive board?
Well, Tim, I started out as a sectional director. I was elected to the Section
Okay.
A director's seat. And the reality of it is, all of the seats on the board of directors really are the same,
Mm-hmm.
because every single person carries one vote, one out of
Yeah.
18 votes on the board, and collectively we make a lot of really important decisions for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter whether you are a sectional director from one part of the country, or if you hold an open seat
Right.
that can come from anywhere in the country. We represent all of the members. The
Right.
real difference comes when a director chooses to get even more involved
Mm-hmm.
and spend even more time and step up to the executive board.
Right.
And the positions really do increase from year to year in terms of the level of involvement
Mm-hmm.
necessary in order to get the work done, ultimately getting to the point where if a director moves all the way up to the president's position, that particular year is it's a busy year. And so this year
Yeah.
has been pretty busy for me.
Well, we talked about that earlier, right? Just trying to be able to find time. We've been trying to connect, I want to say, all the way back to August. And so it's been a busy year, and you were definitely very, very, very busy. Now, before we make the transition to, because I do want to talk a little bit about your role as the president, but I've got a couple other questions kind of leading up to that. And one of the questions that I kind of want to jump into is that transition from being a building official to the fire code official, and you hit on it. And I think that so many of us look at this as like, from building official to fire official, we all need to work together, and it's collaboration. It's a holistic approach. Can you talk about that transition a bit, and break that down for people that may not quite understand that, but hopefully we can maybe make that connection?
Sure. I think that everybody in our positions, Tim, are ultimately focused on the same thing, and that is
Mm-hmm.
protecting people.
Right.
If we weren't truly interested in that, we would all find different professions.
That's true.
And I think the real change or difference was that originally I had a structural focus. As an
Mm-hmm.
engineer, I spent a great deal of my attention on seeing to it that buildings were structurally sound.
Mm-hmm.
Here in California, we have a lot of active seismicity. I was very concerned about the structural integrity of
Yep.
buildings, wanting to make sure that they weren't damaged, suffer collapse, cause injury, death,
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. And it took me several years before I really saw this, but while that is truly important,
It is. Yeah.
um, the reality of it is, in all of our communities, the likelihood of severe damage, injury, or death is more likely to occur as a result of a fire
Mm-hmm.
and issues related to fires than
Right.
earthquakes. If for no other reason, because of the frequency of those
Yeah.
events, we see fires and fire-related incidents multiple times
Yeah.
every single day of the year
Mm-hmm.
throughout this country. Yet a devastating earthquake may only come once every several years. And
Right.
so, in terms of the frequency by which fire events are likely to affect communities, I started focusing on ways to mitigate the adverse effects of fires to increase the effect that I have
Mm-hmm.
on communities. And as I spent more and more time doing that, I came to the realization that if I wanted to truly focus my time where I could be most effective and leave the largest impact possible, I would have to involve fire in the considerations of what I do. I have
Right.
in no way given up my focus on the building code and structural design and those sorts of
Right.
things. But
Yep.
I do spend a lot of time focusing on fires and mitigating the adverse impacts of fires.
Yeah, well, and I think you kind of hit on it right there is that it's what shapes you, right? Your structural engineering background, but also then your introduction to the fire safety aspect of things makes you who you are and makes you, I truly think that makes you more well-rounded, kind of like this podcast for me. It kind of has opened a lot more doors, and I've interviewed a lot of folks on the building safety side of things. It's not just strictly fire code enforcement or community risk reduction, but it has definitely shaped or maybe changed my perspective in many things. And I think that hopefully as people listen to these discussions, they can also have that same kind of epiphany. And I've been in this profession now for almost 20 years. Oh, it's been over 20 years. I'm starting to date myself now. I never thought I'd say I have decades doing something like this, but it is definitely one of those things. And I think that really helps shape and identify who you are. And probably, it's gives you that holistic view, I should say.
Yeah, Tim, I think that everybody, given enough time, will find their place
Yeah.
where they believe that they're comfortable, they're very good and effective at what they do, and they
Mm-hmm.
can make an impact. For some people, the greatest impact that they can make in our space is focusing on the building code
Yeah.
and that side
Yep.
of the safety equation. Others focus more on the fire side
Mm-hmm.
of the equation. It just so happened that I was able to strike a really effective balance. And what I have found is that those individuals that are willing to walk on both sides of that line
Mm-hmm.
can be really, really effective in
Yeah.
what we do.
I would agree. Well, as we kind of talk about you've been very active in your role in shaping both building and fire safety standards, and I know that there's been some things that you've done here within the state, but also nationally. Can you talk about some of the key changes you've seen over the course of your career, and what you maybe see that is on the horizon as we talk about emerging trends?
Yeah, I have been involved for quite some time, and some of the provisions that I used to see in the code, I would recognize it as language that I authored
Uh huh.
or co-authored, and um, I've noticed that things have changed in how our codes work. Back when I first started in your, I'm really dating myself now, Tim. I started in the 80s. Um, the codes tended to be a lot more prescriptive.
Yeah.
They were much simpler to apply, and the manner in which things were done is as long as you follow these simple steps,
Mm-hmm.
you are considered compliant. But that approach in the codes was really limiting. And what I am seeing right now is that while the codes are still highly prescriptive because it's
Mm-hmm.
easier to follow a prescriptive model, there's a lot more performance
Yeah.
uh, integrated into the codes.
Yep.
And ultimately, I think that that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I say that is all of us as code and safety officials, if our goal is to see to it that the communities that we protect are safe
Right.
and that the buildings are resilient and will be occupiable and can provide service after disasters and events, it doesn't really matter to us how we get there. We
Right.
just have a certain level of safety and performance that we want to achieve. And I think that what we're seeing is that the codes really are evolving
Mm-hmm.
to have a balance of a prescriptive means of compliance, but the manner in which those thresholds are set are firmly set in
Yeah.
a performance objective. And I think that we're seeing that. We're also seeing a lot of changes in terms of modern technologies
Mm-hmm.
and materials and equipment and such. Um, the buildings that are built today and the materials that they are made of don't look anything like the buildings that were built when I first started.
Right.
Um, Engineered lumber,
Mm-hmm.
composite materials, smart electronic systems that modulate when lights and heating and cooling systems turn on and so forth. They're very, very sophisticated.
Yeah.
And if they're tuned properly, can be very, very effective. But
Mm-hmm.
a price comes with that. And
Yeah.
that is that when things aren't working exactly perfectly or the way they are intended to work, sometimes the outcome is less than desirable. And so as the codes continue to evolve, I think what we're all going to see is that all of these materials and equipment and systems that we're seeing, they're just going to get better and better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
pretty soon, the manner in which they're integrated into buildings will get more and more seamless.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that we're starting to see is more of the artificial intelligence, and we're starting to see more of that come into play. I talked to Dr. Aguirre with Drexel University in one of our previous podcasts that did a lot of work with the Surfside condo collapse. And we talked about a little bit more about some of those building sensors to be able to detect how things are maybe shaping or moving to the future to maybe avert some of those structural collapses that we've seen and be able to be built into some of our buildings. And so I do think that we're starting to go that direction. And I think that it's kind of, we're just on the edge of it. But I would say, and maybe this kind of goes back to the performance piece that you talked about, because we can't, what I thought, I started using some of the artificial intelligence, the chat GPTs and those types of things, like late last year. But you're starting to see that just continue to grow and evolve. And I would imagine just on, as we're talking about building and fire safety, we're going to start seeing the same things.
Tim, I think you're right on the mark there. Um, the automated systems and um, whether it's artificial intelligence or other things that sense
Mm-hmm.
changes in our building environments are making a huge difference in how we do things. Back in the day, you know this, Tim, the
Mm-hmm.
manner in which we protected people from fire was we would see to it that buildings had um, fire resistive walls, 1 hour walls, 2 hour walls,
Yeah.
90-minute
Yep.
self closing, smoke gasketed doors, fire suppression systems that when the temperature got right in that little glass bowl burst, it would spray water all over the
Right.
place.
Yep.
And while that was good, I think that we're finding now is if systems can sense problems before they even get to that point,
Right.
that a
Yeah.
suppression system has to actuate. Or
Yep.
if we get a system that senses products of combustion, there may not even be heat yet,
Right.
but
Yep.
a smoke control system can change the direction that air is moving.
Mm-hmm.
So exhaust takes the smoke out of a building or possibly moves it away from primary means of egress, and the makeup air provides fresher air in those areas. We're finding that buildings can be designed so that the occupants are still safe
Right.
without a lot of the really, I call them heavy features, the fire resistant walls and doors
Mm-hmm.
and so forth that
Yep.
we used to see. But buildings are becoming very complex themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. How do we start to maximize that and become more data driven, but then also then be able to make the buildings more resilient and more resistive to the things that we're trying to do? And I think that you bring up a good point, that early detection. We see a lot now with lithium-ion batteries and those impacts and how quickly those fires can escalate. But we are also now seeing, some new technologies emerge to help identify those before we start to get into thermal runaway, right? Before it starts to propagate to go to cells, because I think that we are going to more of these green initiatives, this cleaner future. But how do we do it safely? And I think that we're in this, technology revolution right now. I think the personal computer, the cell phone, and now I think that we're just continuing to maximize and get to where we need to get. So,
Yeah, I think that what you're referring to, Tim, is the balance that we're
mm-hmm.
seeing that the codes must address. The future of society is not going to see electric bikes, cell
Right.
phones, laptop computers, all of these things that have lithium ion batteries go away. In fact, if
Right.
anything, we're going to see more and more of it because these are conveniences in life.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
instead, what we need to do is we need to find a way to work with them. And that's what the
Mm-hmm.
building codes are doing. And with electrical storage systems and how much capacity is allowed to be in a building now, where they can be, should they be within the occupiable portion of a room? Should they be in a garage? Should
Right.
they be outside of the building? These are all things that we consider so that they get into the codes so that the typical citizen who doesn't do what you do or what I do
Right.
doesn't
Yep.
have to worry about it. We protect them from those types of issues.
Yeah, and like you said, for us, it's perspective. We identify this to be an issue, and I have to have these conversations with my family a lot of times because as we talk about lithium-ion batteries, making sure you use the right charger that comes with it. You don't use aftermarket chargers to ensure that you don't overcharge it because it's not, the listed assembly and end up having, issues with it in the future. And to be honest with you, I had to have that conversation just last week on an issue. And so, but it's a matter of perspective and modern conveniences. But I'm hoping that as time goes on, we're better able to address it. Now, lithium-ion batteries being one of the common challenges that many of us see throughout our communities and even building and safety professionals. But what are some of those other common challenges you think that, from your travels across not only the United States, but the world, what are some of those common challenges you're seeing and how are different jurisdictions addressing them?
The biggest challenge that I see, Tim, and I see this because in my capacity with the Code Council, I do have to travel internationally because we
Mm-hmm.
are a global company.
Right.
We have contractual and MOU agreements with organizations in other countries, and so I do travel, and I get to see how they address these types of issues. And what I see is um, a need for more personal responsibility.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is our codes can have a lot of really good standards and requirements that will make our communities safe.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see in lots of parts of the world, lots of parts of our country as well, is a desire not only to protect ourselves, but also to protect our neighbors.
Yeah.
And our codes actually are designed so that if we as a society choose to apply them, we can protect not only ourselves, but we can protect our neighbors at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that we're seeing in a lot of our country are wildfires. Um, I remember back when nobody thought that we would see wildland or conflagration type fires in
Yeah.
Hawaii because, heck, it rains there almost every day.
Tropical climate, right? It's
Tropical climate, yet
yeah.
yet one of the most devastating fires that we've ever
Yeah.
seen
Yep.
occurred in the state of Hawaii. And by personal responsibility, what I'm referring to is um, the recognition
Mm-hmm.
that we all have a responsibility to protect ourselves, but also we do have a responsibility to protect our neighbors as well.
Right.
It's not fair for individuals to say, well, you know what, I don't want to cut down the brush and trees and dead limbs around my property because I'm willing to take that risk.
Right.
Um, that risk that they are exposing them to also exposes their neighbors to
Yeah.
risk because if they don't do what is required on their own property, that can have an adverse impact on the neighbors as well. And so
Right.
when we take a look at things such as the International Wildland Urban Interface Code and we take a look at fuel modification and brush clearance
Mm-hmm.
requirements and water supply and everything else, it affects not only the individual property's safety, but it goes further. It's a community safety issue.
Yeah.
And I think one of the challenges, to answer your question, is that I'm seeing a struggle that some people are having in terms of determining whether or not they have a duty or responsibility to protect their neighbors or whether or not they should just look out after themselves. And I think that if they apply the codes properly, they can do both at the same time.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. It's a shared responsibility, right? I think we all have that shared responsibility for safety in our communities. And wildland, wildland urban interface and the fuel reductions is one good example. And I think in California we're doing a much better job as we take a look at defensible spaces and being able to better harden our communities. And you mentioning the wildland urban interface code or the International Wildland Urban Interface Code, the state is actually continuing to evolve and make strides to even improve more of what we have. And I know that you were here during the inception of Chapter 7A that we always refer to here in the state of California. And for all of our people that listen to this outside of California, Chapter 7A is the, lack of a better term, our wildland urban interface, but it really does deal a lot with some of our, home hardening and structure hardening as well. And so, but you were definitely, as we talk about shaping national and local standards, you were definitely on the forefront of that.
Yeah, and that's something that was one of the reasons why I started to pay attention to the fire service impact on our built community. I was actually a building official at the
Mm-hmm.
time. I helped with the development of California's WUI standards in Chapter 7A. And through my involvement in that, eventually I ended up transitioning over and becoming a fire marshal. But I was a building official at the time,
Yeah,
and I focused on that because while some people think that that's a fire issue, it's a building issue as
it
well
is.
because we're
Yep.
building a lot of homes
Yeah.
in the interface area. But to get to one more example of where, when you talk about what some of the challenges are, um, some of our dense construction, multifamily housing, we have situations there where I certainly hope that as the codes evolve and we can figure out how to more safely address some of these things that aren't going to go
Mm-hmm.
away, we
Yeah.
can find ways that people will not put others at risk. You talked
Right.
about lithium ion batteries earlier, and it so happens that ICC has an ad hoc committee that is
Mm-hmm.
looking at the impacts of lithium-ion batteries, whether it be energy storage systems or consumer electronics, whether they
Right.
be your cell phone
Mm-hmm.
or e-bikes and
Yeah.
e-scooters and so forth. When somebody living in an apartment on the third floor of an apartment building chooses to bring his e-bike up the elevator each at the end of each day and plug it into a charger and
Yeah.
lean that e-bike behind the sofa,
Right.
um, they're putting not just themselves at risk, but everybody that lives
Yeah.
in that apartment building at risk if there's a runaway fire. And so
Right.
as we look at these issues, we're trying to find ways to enable people to understand what they're doing better,
Yeah.
because a lot of these people who are doing this, they have no idea that they're putting themselves or others at risk. And if they knew that, maybe they would leave that e-bike downstairs and find a way to charge it outside of their unit.
Right. Yeah, and I always tell, and I think you started to identify the differences. I always tell people there's always this clear distinction as we talk about lithium-ion batteries. Everybody thinks that every lithium-ion battery is unstable and it's going to cause an explosion. But I think we need to make a very distinct difference between battery energy storage systems, electric vehicles, powered mobility, and then also our consumer electronics or just regular electronics that utilize lithium-ion batteries. They all have unique hazards, but they're all a little bit different sometimes too. And I've seen stories anywhere from a vacuum, rechargeable vacuum, and a pair of heated gloves have caused fires, but also EVs and powered mobility, and even our battery energy storage systems. They all have some. I would say it's a scale, to the type of fire that they have, but also to the magnitude of those fires simply can have larger impacts depending on the type of activity that the devices use, like an electric bike being stored in an apartment building. That to me has a little bit higher risk than maybe a battery energy storage system out in the field, away from everybody as we talk about life safety. So now we talked a little bit about technology, and I don't want to necessarily go to technology because people listening to this podcast probably want to hear more about your priorities as president. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. And you've been the president now since last fall, and I want to talk a little bit about your priorities and the things that you've done throughout your term as president of being on the board of directors.
I would say that I have a number of priorities. So it's not like there's just one or two things that I'm focusing
Mm-hmm.
on. One of the most important things that I really, really want to stress is that the organization continues to progress in the direction that it's been going, because we are so much more than
Yeah.
a code publishing company, which is what a lot of people think that the International Code
Yep.
Council is. But we do so much more than just develop and publish the codes. And if you take a look at what the Code Council has done recently, within the past 5 years, we've really expanded
Mm-hmm.
the organization to include so many more services, which is why we refer to ourselves now as the family of solutions.
Right.
And what we're finding is that from modular construction to testing and certification to evaluation of products, there's so much that we do. And most of that development is occurring overseas,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's in Europe or in parts of Asia and so forth. But a lot of the development and truly a lot of the innovation that we see occurs overseas. And so
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I certainly hope that ICC will continue to do is find a way to see to it that these materials, this equipment, these technologies that are finding their ways into our buildings can be done so in a way which really is safe and reliable.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much stuff that you can purchase, whether it's on Amazon or eBay or just off the shelf at your local construction building supply company,
Right.
that it's questionable whether or not somebody should be putting it in their building.
Right.
But one of the things that I certainly hope ICC will do is be that organization that will be there to see
Mm-hmm.
the emerging trends, be available to test and certify products and equipment so that when they find that itself in a building, we know that it's safe. I think that as long as this organization can continue to help all of our members be better at what we all do, I think I'll be happy. And the reason that I always keep that in focus, Tim, is in order for us to provide the services that we do,
Mm-hmm.
ICC is a business.
Right.
And the manner in which we generate the revenues to provide these services is changing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, we're not just a code development and publishing organization anymore. And because of the manner in which our codes are used is shifting from printed, published books to
Right.
electronic media,
Uh-huh.
it's so much easier for that intellectual property to be used in an unauthorized fashion.
Right. Yep.
And so to simply acknowledge that, we will try our best to protect our intellectual property, but we're astute enough to recognize that it's going to be very, very difficult to stop that.
Yep.
So we're going to need to find other sources of revenue so that we can continue to fund all of the different services that you and others rely
Mm-hmm.
on. And so I certainly hope that we will continue to focus on international growth. Domestically, we're pretty mature. There's a little
Yep.
bit of area for growth here in the
Yep.
States, but where our real growth is, I would say, is overseas in Europe and in parts of Asia.
Okay. Yeah, and I've talked to Judy Zakreski was one of our previous guests, and she talked a little bit about the different. Well, I don't say a little bit. The whole podcast was about global initiatives, and so as we talk about the global influence and maybe reaching out to in Europe and Southeast Asia. Can you discuss some of those initiatives that the board and yourself are working on continuing to grow that global influence for ICC?
Yeah. The IRCC, and I need to remember what those letters stand for, the Interregulatory
You're going to be better at
Collaborate.
this than me.
Yeah. I used to have it. It used to just roll off the tip of my tongue. Interjurisdictional Regulatory Collaboration Committee. That is a consortium of international bodies that are truly interested in promoting that international
Mm.
collaboration concerning best practices in
Okay.
what we all do. Because what we do here in America isn't always the best solution. They may
True.
be doing certain things in Germany or
Mm-hmm.
in Spain or in France better than we do here, and we learn a lot. It's fantastic, that
Yeah.
collaboration. As an example, one of the things that you would think that we would be well aware of here, and in some areas of our country we are, we don't have nearly as much of a focus as they're seeing in parts of Europe. And that has to do with realizing that vehicles are getting a whole lot heavier.
Yeah.
And part of it is because of the proliferation of large pickup trucks
Mm-hmm.
and SUVs, but now electric vehicles,
Yeah.
batteries are very, very heavy.
Yeah.
And You would think that we would have been the first to have figured out how to address these issues because we have more larger, bigger pickup trucks and
Mm-hmm.
SUVs and EVs than they have in most parts of the world.
Right.
Yet in Germany, they recognized that virtually every existing parking structure is now representing a community risk because
Okay.
those parking structures and every single person listening to this podcast has these in their communities.
Yep.
They were built back when cars were smaller.
Okay.
They were built
Yeah. Yeah.
before EVs had even been conceived yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you consider that now these parking structures that are in our communities, 3/4 of the vehicles are big pickup trucks or SUVs or EVs.
Right.
They are now being loaded much heavier than they ever were before. So from a structural safety standpoint, are these putting our communities at risk? And it's not just the vertical static loading
Mm-hmm.
of these buildings, just due to the coefficient of friction between the tires and the parking surface. In an earthquake, there's a lot more weight up there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, they could be compromised if there's an earthquake simply because society has changed and we now have bigger vehicles.
Yep.
So, this is an example of how collaboration around the world has helped us see things more clearly. And I certainly hope that as this information from the IRCC has been brought back to the US, that
Mm-hmm.
all of our communities are looking at this because we have an issue that we have to address.
Yeah.
Sometime in the not too distant future, Tim, virtually every vehicle in a parking structure is probably going to be a pickup truck or an SUV or some type of electric vehicle.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, those structures will be severely overloaded based
Mm-hmm.
on how they were originally designed and constructed. We're also seeing collaboration and changes in terms of other things. The materials of construction that we're starting to see right now, we are seeing so much more engineered
Yeah.
material and
Yep.
composite materials that have a lot of plastics and other things in them that might be fantastic from the perspective of strength,
Mm-hmm.
durability. Some of these composites, they're impervious
Yeah.
to termites and rot and so forth. But boy, when they burn, they can give
Right.
off some really noxious fumes and gases. And so, how we address that is very different. And then, of course, we talked about this earlier. A lot of the smart technologies that we're seeing um, through collaboration internationally, we're finding before it even hits the market, what are some of the trendy things that we're going to see? Because
Mm-hmm.
let's face it, if it's cool, people are going to want to have it in their
Exactly.
homes.
Yep.
And we need to know what effects they're going to have because some things that work really, really well when everything is working perfectly work really, really poorly if even the slightest thing gets out of sync. And we need to be
Right.
aware of these things so that we can determine should they be allowed under our codes. And if they
Mm-hmm.
are allowed, what does it mean? Tim, earlier I mentioned that over my career, I've seen the ways in which construction has changed because back in the early 80s when I started, the solution was put up a bunch of firewalls and self-closing smoke gasketed fire
Right.
doors, a few
Yep.
sprinkler heads, and you call it good.
Yep.
But now with technology, we're seeing so much less of that. We're seeing huge open spaces
Yeah.
and then actuated systems where if smoke is detected before heat or other things or flame is even seen, dampers close, air
Mm-hmm.
moves in different directions, smoke containment systems actuate in front of elevator doors. And all that works really, really well when the power's on.
Yeah.
And of course, sophisticated buildings are required to have backup and standby power. And all of that looks really, really good on paper. But what happens when all of that is computer controlled? And the power may be on, but the
There's
smart
a glitch.
system, and there are pros and cons, and I look at both sides. I remember back when the hardwired, interconnected smoke alarm in homes almost became a thing of the past. Yeah, we still run that extra wire for the interconnect, but these days, especially for retrofit, you can have RF connection so that when one smoke alarm goes off, it sends an RF signal and the other things automatically go off, and they work really well. Well, as we find more and more of these systems go through your router and your computer system, that's just one more method by which things may go wrong. So we need to collaborate with developers domestically and around the world to see how these systems work and see how we can guarantee their effectiveness and safety.
Yeah, and I think that, as we talk, and now we'll shift into collaboration, actually. I think that that's a good segue into, as we look at collaboration and how does ICC and the board of directors collaborate with organizations and governments for the deployment of the family of solutions. As we talk about ICC's global influence, but not even just global, maybe domestically as well, how do you collaborate with governments and other organizations, for the deployment of solutions?
Tim, we collaborate with almost everybody. And the manner in which we do that is we're facilitators. ICC itself is not the organization that is going to say that a system or a technology or a product should be used. We're also not going to say that that system or product or technology should not be used. But what we do is we facilitate by bringing those exact parties that you mentioned together through our development process. So if governments are concerned that in my city or my county, I'm concerned that this technology is starting to be used and I don't know if it is safe, or if manufacturers are developing products which might provide a fantastic service within the built environment, have a product that they would like people to know about. And if code officials see, the intersection of this space and think, okay, there's a possible place for this solution that might solve a problem that has been difficult to solve in the past, and these manufacturers are coming up with all of these different solutions, but we need to be comfortable with them before we see them in a building in my community. ICC can bring them together. And Tim, I know that you've been very active in the code development space. And so, you were just in Orlando with our code development hearing. This is where we bring people together and we can determine what should be allowed in the code, what should not be allowed in the code. If something is allowed, what requirements should be tied to it. And we let all of the parties discuss this. And while ICC facilitates that, it's the consensus process that ultimately determines what's best for our communities. And, it evolves and changes, but that's the role that ICC plays. And I'm really, really comfortable with that, because I do believe that by facilitating this, we get the brightest people, that, the interested stakeholders on every side of an issue together. It may take a while. Something may not get approved or disapproved the first time. But eventually, things get in the code after they're hashed out enough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a consensus process, and I think that so many people maybe aren't aware of that. But I think that the more we say it, it is a consensus process, and the more people are aware of it, that they know that they can help shape the code. That's a good thing. Now, with the ICC being the International Code Council, as we look at the code development process, has there been more activity to maybe bring in some of our global partners to help shape that code development process a little bit more? Maybe Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, as we look at some of those things that they're seeing in their area as we continue to move forward.
I think over time, we're going to see more and more international involvement because of the fact that our codes are being used increasingly in one form or another in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
In fact, in some parts of the world where the codes may not be formally adopted from a legislative standpoint, we're seeing that our codes are being adopted as their de facto standard or means of construction, if for no other reason. They're simple to use, they're consistent, and so forth. In Belize, in Central America, for example, it would be very, very difficult for them to officially adopt our codes, because if I take the International Residential Code as an example, it's got wonderful tables in there that tells you if you need a certain size joist or beam, if you take a Douglas fir or southern yellow pine, grade number 2, a 4x6, it's good for this span. In some parts of the world, they can't go to their building supply or lumber yard and say, I would like a 4x10 southern yellow pine or Douglas fir number 1 beam. They don't have that.
Right.
But the nice thing is the tables and charts that we have in the code still give guidance that if you're going to have a repetitive member every 16 inches or every 24 inches, or if you're going to have a beam span over a certain size door or window, if the code prescriptively recommends a certain size, then even in these developing countries that may not have grade stamped lumber readily available, they can use what is available, which oftentimes is a stronger species of wood, like mahogany in Belize. I would take a 4x10 mahogany beam over a 4x10 Douglas fir beam every day of the week. And so our codes are being increasingly used, and as a result, we're finding that they do have an interest in what ends up in the code. So we're gradually seeing more and more international participants in our process. But just logistically, since code development takes place in the United States, the majority of the folks that are going to participate are going to be the local users. So predominantly, we're talking about people from the U.S.
Yeah, and I'm waiting for that next conference maybe to be in, maybe London or Paris, and maybe that's when we have the public comment hearings, and maybe I can make just a long trip out of it. But for anybody that has not been part of the code development process, if you think that it's just a 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and you're out of the conference room and you're able to go see the sites, you are sorely mistaken. You are going to spend a lot of time in a conference room. And some days may go from 8 to 8 or 8 to 9 or maybe even 8 to 10 p.m. And so, don't think that it's just going to be a vacation. It's a lot of work if you have not been part of the code development process.
Tim, and I've seen you at the code hearings for years now. I'm sure that you will agree with me that while participation in the code development process is extremely valuable, because you yourself have, been a part of the success of certain
Mm-hmm.
provisions getting in the code.
Yep.
But even aside from that, the folks that participate in the code development activities by meeting and collaborating
Yeah.
with your counterparts from around the country,
Yep.
you've gotten to know so many more people.
Oh yeah.
And I would imagine that if you ever were to stumble across something that you couldn't figure out or know how to address, you could easily pick up the phone and call somebody, whether it's from
Yep.
Maryland or New York or anywhere, because you've made so many fantastic
Right.
professional contacts.
Yeah, actually, funny you should say that. I do that on a pretty regular basis because I know those people that have as we talk about Chapter 7A, I know who to call to talk about those provisions. Or if it's something on lithium-ion batteries, I know that who helped to author some of that text. And so you bring up a good point. Be active and get involved in the code development process, even if you do it locally within your associations. I know I'm part of the California Fire Prevention Officers, and we're very active in code development, but we always ask for volunteers to help us review proposals. And so that way you can gain a better understanding of what those proposals are. And maybe eventually you go to some committee action hearings and the public comment hearings. There's a lot of stuff out there. So the more you get involved, the better it will be for you. Now, Stuart, we're right at the top of an hour, and so as we start to kind of bring our podcast to a close, or this episode to a close, what other thoughts do you have that you can share with our audience in regards to ICC and just really building in fire safety in general?
Tim, I would say that every single person listening to this podcast should realize that they themselves are the next future leader, or can be, and that those that have already spent the time in our profession, they should do everything that they can to motivate and encourage and mentor those around them, because I look back at when I first started, and I was really, really lucky. I had people that I worked for, supervisors when I was a structural plan checker and doing other things, that always encouraged me. They were just so humble, and it encouraged me to learn more and try new things without the fear of failing and being embarrassed. And that was so important, because when those that have been in this profession for a while really can encourage and motivate people, the people that they mentor, their confidence just goes way up.
Absolutely. Yep.
And when you give people confidence, you can inspire them to try things or get involved in ways that they might not otherwise be willing to do on their own. And as I mentioned to you earlier this hour, I started in the 80s.
Yeah.
Here we are in 2024. I can't believe I've been doing this for just shy of 40 years now. But when I first started, I was that green individual who didn't think that I knew much, didn't think that I could ever, lead a committee or contribute anything worthwhile. And here I am on the ICC board of directors. Just help people.
Yeah.
And if you're that young person, I'm going to quote somebody. I won't mention who said this, because everybody who hears what I say will know who said this. When somebody asks you to do something or to volunteer, just say yes.
Yep.
Just say yes.
You and I both know who that is.
We know who that is. And you know what? if you just say yes enough times, you will find that you surround yourself with people who make your job so much easier,
Yeah,
make you better at what you do, and before you know it, you might be the next president of the ICC board.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you- I started my career in the Midwest, and I've migrated to Colorado, now California. I'll be honest, when I was first beginning to be a deputy state fire marshal in the Midwest, I never thought I'd be here. I said yes to a lot of things, and look where I'm at now. I'm interviewing Stuart Tom, the president of the board of directors for the ICC, and got to do a lot of cool things, and code development being one of them, as we talked about. And so I would agree with you 100%. So, Stuart, as we bring it to a close, where can people find more information about and stay up to date with the things that you're doing and the board of directors are doing with ICC?
Two things. ICC tries to keep as much information it can on its website,
Uh huh.
iccsafe.org. From the website, you can always find the current things that are going on, and all the different pull down tabs will show you what the different family of solutions has that are available. When there are opportunities to apply for a seat on one of our code development
Mm-hmm.
committees, that's where you're going to find it. That is a fantastic way to always be aware of what's going on with ICC. The second thing is, if you are not already a part of your local chapter, whether it is a city chapter, whether it is a regional chapter like Region 1,
Mm-hmm.
or if it is a statewide chapter, um, get involved at the chapter level. ICC's governmental relations staff always keeps the chapters informed in terms of
Yes.
all the different things that are going on,
Yep.
training opportunities, different things that they can do to just make their jobs easier and get better at what they do. But I would say um, stay involved, and if you uh, spend time with your chapter, and if you're ever asked to consider stepping up to serve on that chapter board, just say yes.
All right. Thanks, Stuart. We'll bring it to a close with that. All right,
Thank you,
everyone.
Tim.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and everyone, stay tuned for our next episode, and we just keep bringing them to you. So if you ever want to be a guest on one of the episodes, just let me know. All right. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, Tim.